of a coalition of former council leaders and other experts. The Building a Local Scotland campaign says promises that devolution would lead to decentralisation have been broken. Three of the campaign's key figures, Esther Robertson, who was coordinator of the Scottish Constitutional Convention, former Edinburgh City Council leader Ewan Aitken, and the journalist Lesley Riddoch, joined us to discuss its aims. Ewan Aitken, you led Edinburgh Council, you sat on COSLA. What's wrong with councils?
It's not so much what's wrong with councils, it's what we could do better. That's the point of the exercise. Although I have to say that if you think the answer to local government is 32, it's probably a pretty stupid question, because it's too far from people, but not close enough and strong enough in itself. So we need a different way of approaching how we build local government and local democracy from the bottom up, and then have the things in the centre that we require.
So more councils?
Oh, absolutely. But more councils that are closer to people and providing more opportunities for more people to be participants in the political process, so that actually people get a wider range of experiences and bring their experience to it. You'd be surprised to know that we have the fewest politicians per head of population in the whole of Europe.
People have just cheered at home.
Absolutely, I know they have. It is counterintuitive, I'll absolutely give you that. But why did in 1974 did we have 400 councils in Scotland, and now we've got 32? And you're going to say, was that an improvement? I don't think so. We can do a lot better, but you do better when you have more people in the room talking and participating.
Lesley Riddoch, you've been banging on about councils being too big in Scotland for years.
Yes, but I mean, half the people that you think are cheering at home are actually doing local community things. They just aren't empowered. They just aren't funded. They just haven't got structure. They just don't actually. Community councils in Scotland have an average budget of £400 a year that's meant to be spent on stationery. You know, it's ludicrous, actually, where we've got to with this. If you look at anywhere else in Europe, of course, I'm a bit prone to the Nordics, but look at anywhere else in Europe. Let's look at Highland Council, for example. Unbelievable. It occupies a third of the physical landmass of Scotland, a tenth of Britain, and it's one council. It's actually larger in size than the country of Belgium, which has one federal government, 3 community governments, 3 regional governments, and 581 councils. And we call that one local council.
Take Highland, for example. How many council areas should it have?
Now, OK, I could come up with... There's actually been about 5 reports that have all come up with different proposals for how you would sort this. COSLA itself, if you like, voted for Christmas when it suggested that perhaps 100 at least would be the right number. Another report has looked at 138 local councils. If we were matching Norway, which we do match with population, we'd have 400. But we're proposing citizens' assemblies to take all the evidence in and come up with a new template, because this scares politicians rigid. They won't take the initiative, so people have to.
Esther Robertson, you were involved in the Scottish Constitutional Convention before we even got to the Scottish Parliament. Is this how things were supposed to work? Is this what it was set up to do?
What we're proposing is what it was set up to do.
So it hasn't done what it was set up to do in 25 years?
No, the convention committed, everybody involved signed up to a strong, effective system of local government that was truly local, the principle of subsidiarity, that awful word that means we take decisions close to the people. I spent 2 years doing presentations all over the country, promising people the Parliament wouldn't suck powers up from local government because people had promised it wouldn't. And 25 years on, I've been proved very wrong. All the governments since the Parliament was established have drawn powers to the centre, and it's time we got them back out into communities and had really local councils that would empower communities to do what's right for them and begin to build our democratic muscle.
See, a lot of what we see from councils is the annual dance with the unions and the Scottish Government over funding, which leads to bin strikes and school strikes, teacher strikes over the last few years as well. There's a lot wrong with councils just now, isn't there?
So, but that proves the point. We need to do something radically different. And if the relationship between those delivering services and those voting for them is much closer, the accountability is completely different. As we were hearing today at the event they had this morning, folk in Norway say when they're a council officer, they meet their voters in the supermarkets. They are accountable to their neighbours. And so it's a radically different conversation. At the moment, it's a long, long way for people, and all folks see is conflict.
And one of our colleagues on the panel this morning, Dave, I've just forgotten his name. Dave Watson from Unison, former Unison officer, was making the point, why in a country this size don't we have a single standard contract of employment across all councils? Why do we have 32 councils having lots of different negotiations and all the rest? So I think there is a big argument to be had about how we fund these things and how we manage them, but that has to start again, as Ewan says, from the bottom up.
Now, your body is cross-party, Lesley, but there's no cross-party consensus on what to actually do about councils. There's no sign of anybody even willing to take any action, really, is there?
Exactly. And I mean, that's where, again, if you look at Ireland, nobody was going to take on equal marriage or abortion. They were too hot to trot, the politicians were terrified, and a citizens' assembly came up with the answer. So we're largely taking that way of looking at it because the politicians are really scared of what was a great upheaval when we had all the reorganisations to date. So we want to get the people to be able to start questioning,
But they can't
taking
even change
examples.
the funding of local authorities. What chance is there of this?
With the chances that this actually right-sizes pretty much the whole thing. Of course, we need to have discussions. I'm for a land tax. I think half of Scotland's for a land tax. The SNP have passed a motion for a blinking land tax, and we haven't got one. But there's no point in having these arguments about what are essentially regional strategic authorities when there's nothing. It's like a tent that's got no tent pegs pinning it down. That's where we are now because we've got nothing right at the community level except hard-pressed, burnt-out volunteers.
What about Labour's suggestion of elected mayors?
So if that's what folk wanted, that might help get you where you want to. But the places where mayors work best is what their task is to pull together local communities to work together. You know, for example, at Manchester, the local council said, actually, there are some things we could do better if we had somebody to hold the ring for all of us. And that's essentially what you've got with Andy Burnham. I mean, he will tell you he has no power, but he has a lot of influence, and he gets people to collaborate. And that's what you do across the world. In France, there are 22,000 local authorities, but power starts at the local authority and goes upward when it needs to. So you have a mayor of Paris, because that's good in Paris, because that's what you need for a city. But in other places, you're able to do it on a much lower local basis.
Is mayors the answer then?
No. I'm back to Ewan's point earlier about it being a daft question. If mayors are the answer, what is the question? And the question is we're lacking local democracy.
Yes.
And just having one powerful figurehead's not going to change that. And as far as I'm concerned, your point about finance is right. It's too hard for the political parties, and yet they've all agreed the council tax needs reform. There are lots of proposals on the table from academic think tanks and others as to how we could reform
it. But do any of the political parties in Scotland have the nous to do that? Are they too afraid to do that? Do they have the ability to go that far, do you think, briefly?
Politicians have to lead, but they also have to respond. And if you can get a mood that says...
So far they haven't.
That doesn't matter. That's not the point. That's only so far. In the future, if we can get enough people saying, we want this kind of change, we want communities to be in charge of their own destiny, they are much more likely to respond to that.
Colin, we've been on the go one day, with all due respect. We've got a declaration we're asking people to sign up to that basically says we want to return to European norms. We want our communities to have power. We want to get power out of Holyrood, and we want us to be able to decide how that works. So that's one day old. And we're really meaning to stay the course and have a big event on Ferns Night next year where we'll start that process.
Well, we've started the debate, and thanks, folks, for joining us in Scotland tonight.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.